ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಮರಣಿಗೆ ಹೊಂದ್ಕೊಂಡಾನೆ ಇಂಡಿ ಹೆಂಗ್ ಜೊತೆ ಅವರು NRI ಹುಡುಗರಂದು ಸಂಕೇತಿ ಭಾಷೆ ಕಲ್ತ್ಕೊರ್ತ್ಲೆ ಕಂಡ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿ ಶಶಾಂಕ್ ಅನ್ಕೊಂಡು US ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಸೆಟ್ಲ್ ಆಯ್ಕರ್ದೆ ಹುಟ್ಟುವಳ್ಜಿ ಕರ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಅಮೇರಿಕಾ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಇಪ್ಪೋ ಸತ್ನಾಳೆಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಮೈಸೂರುಳ್ಳೆ ಕನ್ನಡ ಕಲ್ತ್ಕೋಕೆ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಬಂದ್ರಂದು. ಸೊ ಇಂಡಿ ಹೆಂಗಡೆ ಎಪಿಸೋಡ್ ಉಳ್ಳೆ ಶಶಾಂಕ್ ಹೋಗ್ರಂದು ಎಂಡಕ್ಕ ಸಂಕೇತಿ ಭಾಷೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕಂಡ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ பண்ணிರಂದು. அது இப்போ ஸ்கிரிப்ட் டெவலப் பண்ணிடுறாந்தி ಸಂಕೇತಿ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರು ಕನ್ನಡ ಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಟ್ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಅಲ್ದಾಣಿದ್ದು ನಂಬೆ ಇತ್ತನ್ನ ಅದು ಕನ್ನಡ ಕಮ್ಮಿ ಅಲ್ದಾಣಿದ್ದು ಸಂಕೇತಿ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಅಲ್ದರ್ದೆ ಕನ್ನಡ ಕಮ್ಮಿ ನಂಬೆ. ಸೊ ಅದತ್ತೆ ವೊಕ್ಯಾಬ್ಯುಲರಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಪಣಿಒಟ್ಟಿ ಅವರು ಸೌತ್ ಈಸ್ಟ್ ಏಷ್ಯನ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜಸ್ ಮತ್ತು ಸೌತ್ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸೇರಿ ಚೊಟ್ಟಿ ಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಟ್ ಪೋಲೆ ಪಣಿರಂದಿ. ಸೊ ಅದರ ಅಚೀವ್ಮೆಂಟಿ ಪ್ಲಸ್ നമ്മുടെ ಸೌತ್ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಹಿಂದೂ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಪಣ್ಣಿ ಅಮೆರಿಕ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಹುಟ್ಟುವಳ್ಜಿಂದಲೂ നമ്മുടെ ಸಂಕೇತಿ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಹಿಂದೂ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅತ್ನೇ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಇರಂದಿ ಶಶಾಂಕಕ್ಕೆ. ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಆತೊಟ್ಟೆ ಕಂಡ ನಮ್ಮಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂತೋಷ. ಸೊ ಇಂಡಿ ಶಶಾಂಕ್ ಜೊತೆಲೆ ವಾರ್ಸೋಲ್ದಮ್ಮ ಇಂಡಿ ಎಪಿಸೋಡ್ ಫುಲ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಇರಂದಿ. ಶಶಾಂಕಕ್ಕೆ ಅತ್ನೇ ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸಿ ಇಲ್ಲ ಸಂಕೇತಿ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ವಾರ್ಸೋಲ್ ಅಂಡೋಣ ನಮಗೆ. ಸೊ ವಾರಂಗೋಯಿನ ಜೊತೆಲೆ ಶಶಾಂಕ್ ಜೊತೆ ವಾರ್ಸೋಲ್ದಮ್ಮ. Namaskar. First of all, thanks a lot for your time and thanks a lot for joining me. So tell us something about yourself, your educational background, and
Yeah. So sure. So my name is Shashank and I am currently a master's student at the University of Chicago, studying constructive studies and human theology and focusing on the Shiva tradition. By background, I grew up in the U.S., specifically in the Bay Area of California, and both of my parents are Sankethi, and my interest in sort of Sankethi culture and tradition started kind of toward the end of high school and when I went to college, because I met my uncle when I was an undergrad, who lived in Long Island and taught me a lot about the sort of Sankethi culture, and also told me about they had a sort of monumental study of the Sankethi community. My research originally was primarily about the language, Sankethi language, because I heard my grandmothers speak it. I didn't really understand what it was, so I was kind of curious to know more about it. And when I say research, this is not for my master's at all. This is entirely personal. But my research started by basically I interviewed my grandmothers, my uncle, and a handful of other people on basically compiling lists of Sankethi vocabulary.
Okay.
And then basically I had studied Kannada Vyakarana a little bit before, and basically using my knowledge of that, I tried to construct a grammar for Sankethi. It's still very much a work in progress. It's not like it's been heavily improved by reading the work of H.S. Nandanarayana, who he, among I think 4 other scholars, were like among the very few people to actually write about the Sankethi language. And like this actually kind of gets to the reason I'm not speaking in Sankethi right now, which is that my Sankethi, my command of Sankethi, is very technical. It is very much centered on a grammatical perspective on Sankethi, and that's the way I write. I basically developed a standard for writing, at least for myself. I write poetry in Sankethi, and that is an attempt to standardize the way the Sankethi language is written and produced, and it is based on a combination of takes Kaushika Sankethi as its base because that's what my family speaks. I acknowledge that the dialect also exists, and also sort of in conversation with the Nagahari, dialect as well. And basically, I wanted to sort of develop some version of Sankethi that, consolidates really different ways of saying things and really understanding kind of Sankethi as like a cluster of related dialects of the same language. And it's the reason that a lot of people who have read my poetry do not understand what it says. The other reason being that I take artistic license where I've studied a lot of Asian languages and I like using words from those languages in my poetry. particularly Old Japanese, Mandarin, and Korean. So those are the languages I've been studying recently. And part of this is also like somewhat a cultural project in that I grew up in the US. I will make no pretensions about being the most authentic kind of Sankethi out there. I'm out to sort of forge my own identity within the Sankethi community, and that has led to me to certain, disagreements with certain things about the Sankethi language. And the thing is, it's also not as if Sankethis don't disagree with themselves. Like, whether you're reading H.S. Narayana, Kikeri Narayana, or Siddhi Dattatreya's Sankethi Bhasha Bodhini, like, these are all people who have written about the Sankethi language. They disagree about the grammar of the language. I mean, for the Shashti Vikanti, the Siddhi Dattatreya gives like 3 different possibilities and doesn't really explain why they're like that. And to some extent, these are also approximations of the way people speak. Any written language, Kannada included, like any written language at some level is a conceit about a particular way of writing and speaking. Right. And to that extent, I also take influences from the grammatical tradition of Kannada. I've been reading a little bit of Kaviraja Marga, and I would like to do the Shatabani Darpana at some point, but certainly studying with my professors in Mysore, I've been sort of learning a lot more about sort of the way that Kannada writers imagine the Kannada language and taking some of those influences in how I think about Sankethi, because it is true on the one hand that Sankethi has a history, has developed a certain vocabulary and form in accordance with its culture and its norms. On the other hand, there are certain decisions that strike me as intentional. For example, I have met a few Sankethis who insist that we should not borrow words from Tamil. Okay. This strikes me as odd, because Sankethi is morphologically related to Tamil. It is descended from Tamil. Absolutely. Yeah. But most Sankethi speakers, on the whole, prefer borrowing from Kannada if they have to borrow at all. Okay. And those are the kinds of constructive decisions at work in speaking Sankethi. And so similarly, when I write poetry in Sankethi, my decision to borrow from other Asian languages is reflective of a certain aesthetic and sort of cultural interest that I have in that, I have been deeply shaped by my engagements with particularly East Asian and increasingly Southeast Asian literature and tradition, and I would like to incorporate that into my work.
Okay. I don't know any poetry work in Sankethi, so is there any reference, is there any books which I can read?
There aren't any books. I mean, I've written a few things,
Oh, that's your composition?
Yeah, my own compositions. I've not published. I mean, I have a Medium blog where I've written about this. I wrote a poem on Ganapati called the Gujangaraja Varna Paladostava.
Okay.
So, and the theme of that poem is first taking the rainbow as a sort of chromatic theme for the poem, where each stanza talks about color in a certain way, and also imagines Ganapati as playing something called a puja. A puja is a Chinese instrument, also known as a zither. It looks very similar to a mandala, except it's much larger. And the poem imagines Ganapati as Bhujangaraja, the lord who plays the zither. And the poem is sort of very, very different. I mean, it does not follow perhaps as traditional of South Asian religion meters, but
is it available on public domain?
I think it is. Let me just.
Okay, if it's there, I can provide the link in the description.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.
Fair warning, it is not going to sound like Sankethi that most Sankethi speakers will have heard. It is, again, creative license at the moment. So I write poetry from time to time. I haven't done much recently just because I've been studying a lot. It's interesting because Sankethi has kind of been this site of I guess, like speculation about the qualities of poetry and why poetry is meaningful. Because like, one of my very first struggles with writing poetry in Sankethi was that on one hand, like I had this technical knowledge of how the grammar works, and I knew how to get words, find words, both in like dictionary, like this dictionary that, or the glossary really, that Anandanarayana has, and then also just from my own collection of words, and then proceeding from there. Like, there's that, but on the other hand, the other shit is meter. Like, sort of chandasu in Sankethi is a complicated subject just because I think Sankethi raises a lot of important questions for, like, particularly the history of Sanskrit poetics. Like, I mean, this whole concept of laghu and guru. I believe that there are certain conceits about what constitutes guru that I feel are not explored enough, particularly because one of the defining features of Sankethi, especially as opposed to Kannada and Tamil, is that it permits a very large number of consonant clusters.
Okay.
And that is a problem for writing poetry because Sanskrit poetry, at least, strongly depends on the ability to vary the use of light and heavy syllables. The problem is that, like, what it defines as a heavy syllable, I think is variable in the sense that it's not variable, it's that it accepts a very broad definition for what constitutes a guru syllable. For example, the syllable da is a light syllable because it has only one consonant onset. It only has one vowel. It is not, and it's a short vowel. The syllable da is a heavy syllable because it has a long vowel. But tra has a consonant cluster at the beginning, and it is not a shitila consonant. It's not anta. And the concept of shitila is also really interesting, especially in Kannada prosody. But for Sanskrit, the syllable tra is treated as a heavy syllable. But the problem is that tra and ta are not treated distinctly. They're both heavy syllables as far as the poet is concerned. And I think there are problems with this. Not that it's right or wrong. I mean, I just think it raises interesting theoretical issues where it's like, are there different kinds of because I feel like the answer is yes. That tra and ta are heavy for different reasons and constitute heaviness in different ways. Similarly, the other issue is like, can there be degrees of heaviness? Like, so you have tra, ta, but then what about tra? Tra has a consonant cluster and a long vowel. Is this heavier than either of the other two syllables? These are the kinds of questions that are especially complicated for Sankethi because consonant clusters are so common. Like the word like hamriya. Hamriya is a weird word because it has this in the beginning, in the middle, which is three consonants, and like it also has a long vowel attached to it. Like, what is the quality of the word ham or the syllable ham if it's not a super heavy consonant or a super heavy syllable? And so, like, when I first started writing Sankethi poetry, this was just to say that when I first started Sankethi poetry, I kind of ignored light and heavy syllables because it's like, I kind of think these are conceits. I don't know that I believe that, I didn't know that I believed that there really was a hard distinction between heavy and light syllables. But as I studied Kannada and Sanskrit, I have come to believe that there is something to it. It's not entirely wrong. I still primarily write poetry on matra grounds. I prefer matra because honestly it's easier for me. It's easier to balance short and long syllables than it is to do light and heavy. And the thing is, that's a thing in Sanskrit. Matrika meters are a thing.
Okay. So,
but yeah.
Coming back to that point, I mean, you said you know multiple languages like Korean, Japanese, and all those
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
So even in our community, there are a lot of people within India or outside India who don't know Sankethi,
Yeah.
can't speak Sankethi. So any tips to them how to approach, or do we need to learn all these technicalities like hamdiya, all those things?
Yeah, no, I mean, for poetry, probably if you don't care about poetry, then probably
Yeah.
not. You don't need to
Yeah.
concern yourself with those things.
Exactly.
But if you're interested in the style and like the things that at least I do, I don't think anyone else does
Yeah.
this. If you're interested in those sorts of things, I'm happy to talk through them. That's something you have to talk to me about, because it's like I have an interest in the convergence of like South Asian, East Asian, and Southeast Asian literature for the purpose of this unique cultural construct.
Oh no, my question was particular, specifically.
Yeah, I'm just that's what I'm trying to specify. Like
Okay.
studying Sankethi just for the purposes of general communication, the best choices are the Sankethi Bhasha Prabodhini, which is a very sort of rudimentary guide. It is best for Kannada speakers because the guide is written mostly in Kannada. There are issues in that it is grammatically very, very flexible. Like I said, it offers multiple versions of the Shakti Vibhakti and other things. And also, I mean, the key thing also to note about Sankethi is that you can learn from this guide. You could even learn from H.S. Narayana. The problem is that there are people who will disagree on how things are to be said. Like, for example, the Ditya Vibhakti. Like, I mean, this is a technicality, but like, not everyone agrees that the Ditya Vibhakti of Devi should be Deviya, that it should just be Devi. These are grammatical questions that have not been sorted out because Sanketis have not really sat down to theorize the language, and I'm not sure whether I believe that's necessary. I mean, it's something that I do, but it's like, it's the reason that you'll encounter Sanketis who don't speak the same way. I mean, this is not even just about Betapura versus Kaushika Sankethi.
Yes.
The best way really to learn Sankethi is, you know, take one of these guides as your starting point, and then try to just learn the way that the people around you speak. Because like, that's what's like most important. It's irrelevant. Like the things that I do probably are irrelevant for somebody who speaks Betapura Sankethi.
Yeah.
Like the words that we use are different. They even conjugate verbs slightly differently. I mean, they're not unintelligible, but it's just like for that person's purposes, talking to me might not be the most productive use of their time. So,
Okay. So, and you said you were working on script as well.
Yes.
We're going to talk about that.
So yeah, I mean, again, cultural project here. Like I designed a script for Sankethi because I believe that the Kannada script was not entirely suitable. There's a vowel that is missing from Sankethi, from the Kannada script that makes it difficult to write certain things in Sankethi. There's also what like if you're familiar with Devanagari and you know the Chandra Bindu. The Chandra Bindu marks a nasalized vowel that is not a nasal consonant. And that, there is no way to mark that in Kannada. You'd have to use the Anuswara, and the Anuswara is, so like, you'd have to know that it is not the word ha, as in house, or home, is a nasal vowel. And would be written with ha, the word ha, and then the anuswara. Yes. The anuswara will not tell you that it's supposed to be a vowel at the end. It's not a consonant. It's not han. It's not ham.
Yes, it's ha.
So it's those little things. And also like the word abhara. Abhara, I treat that consonant in the middle as a distinct consonant. Bha. An aspirated, a Mahaprana version of va. And again, I've met people who disagree with whether or not that should be treated as a separate consonant.
Yes.
But this is the way that I have thought about Sankethi, and for that reason, I designed a separate script for Sankethi that is based primarily on like Balinese, Javanese, and the Kannada script. So it's like the letters are different in some places, but are also intelligible to Kannada speakers.
That's wonderful. I don't think anybody else has done a similar kind of work in this area. Okay, and what else? Is there anything else?
About the languages that I know. So I mean, I know a few different languages. I speak Spanish, Italian, Portuguese. I mean, honestly, my Kannada language is getting worse because I don't use it as often. But I have this particular Community Sankethi. I speak Kannada. My Hindi is really rusty. I speak Mandarin. I also I have a working knowledge of Korean, and I'm learning Old Javanese right now for my research.
So, did you undergo any formal training or anything for that, or is it like?
In some of these languages, yes. I learned Spanish in high school.
Okay.
I did teach Italian and Portuguese to myself.
Okay.
Because Italian and Portuguese are very similar.
Okay.
Kannada, I've basically taught myself up to this point, and then I started learning stuff more formally.
Okay.
Kannada, I've been studying in my master's degree.
Okay.
Which is not really the same thing as like a second language, I suppose.
Right.
Old Javanese, I've also been studying on my own because there's just very few teachers out there. I learned Korean during an intensive at school, and then Mandarin I learned in undergrad.
Okay.
I'm here on this program to basically study Kannada literature, specifically Haida Kannada and specifically Shaila Kannada literature in the medieval period, because basically I'm interested in the history of textual transmission in the Shaila tradition.
Okay. So how long are you there?
I'll be here for another 4 weeks.
4 weeks. Okay. So
It's a short program.
okay. So is it a program which is affiliated to any university, or is it?
So it's with the American Institute of Indian Studies, and that's a government program in the U.S. And basically, you have to be I don't think you have to be an American citizen or anything, but like usually it's for graduate students who are trying to sort of jumpstart their research in a particular South Asian language. So they have different sites all over the country. They have the center in Mysore. They have one in Kolkata, Jaipur. Amritsar, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Are you planning to visit any Sankethi villages?
So I went to Rudrapartna 2 weeks ago. I've been to Kaushika.
Okay.
And I passed through Hasarali once.
Okay.
But that's about it.
But did you have any takeaways from those trips?
So Kaushika was probably the one that was most significant for me, just because it kind of drove home for me the fact that I'm not really ever going to be as traditional as you want me to be. Like, I visited, the Kuladevata shrine and stuff. I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to go there and visit the family god and stuff, but I think it just made it very apparent to me that, I grew up in a different country. I have different values and I have different objectives. I'll always probably come back to this place, but my relationship to it will be very different from, say, my parents or my grandparents.
Okay.
And, yeah.
So, do you have any organization in the US, Sankethi community?
So, the North American Sankethi Association is the only one that I know of. I'm not an active member of that. I'm not really even a member at all. I mean, I know that it exists, but I'm not really involved with it. I mean, I have relatives who are, but
okay. You mentioned about Chiguru or something.
Yeah, the Chiguru Journal is
a journal.
Yeah, it's a journal that's published every year. I honestly don't know what the state of it is right now, because last time I checked the website was down.
Okay.
And I think that's partly because the pandemic made it impossible to do the yearly convention.
Okay.
So I think people have not been doing anything recently. So.
Okay. And about your research and your script and whatever learnings you are getting, are you going to document it somewhere? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to try to document a little more. I have a Medium blog where I write essays mostly about theology, but occasionally about Sankethi also.
Yeah.
And that's also where my poetry is, and I publish it at all.
Okay.
So thing for viewers who are Sankethi and maybe grew up outside of a traditional Sankethi community, either outside of India or just not in Karnataka. I think the important thing about Sankethi is that because of the way that the language was formed, through sort of migration and influence with other languages and communities, it's important to understand that the Sankethi language is not fixed, and that there are creative ways to engage with it that do not simply involve just talking about Adage, Adakla, there are ways to engage with it that are more than, not to say that the language is insufficient, but it's just like, because some Sanketis have, been very self-conscious about using it in public, it is in a certain state that makes it really difficult to use beyond the home. And that's part of the reason that I write poetry the way I do.
Okay.
Sort of push its boundaries.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Shashank, for your time.
No, thank you.